All right, class, this is our movement pattern number 5, and we're going to go into the lunge pattern. Okay, so the one thing about lunging that I think is pretty misunderstood is that it actually is a pretty difficult movement. Especially now in like quarantine times, I'm sure that people are throwing out, hey, let's just go do some lunges down and back down the driveway, and without a real understanding of how to do the movement pattern and what it really entails, and especially the progressions that you should give somebody from beginning to end. So what we're going to do is we're going to detail what you should start with in the lunge pattern, and then where you can progress to after that, not just in the movement, but in the loading scheme as well. So make sure you have your exercise check off out, both of them. I am going to change the lunge pattern, the individual ones on there, as I'm talking about it today. So just get ready to kind of cross some stuff out, re-change some things. I just want to make a couple changes that I think are just going to help you in programming these eventually when you get there. Okay, so just remember that we're really on a track to be able to start people from the beginning and then move them along as we go. And once you progress all the way through these things, that's when you can start picking and choosing which ones are going to be the best option for you based upon the working muscles, where the load is, and what you're trying to accomplish. So we're going to move on to the first progression, which is a body weight split squat. So now that we've kind of introduced the lunge movement pattern itself, it's important to understand that this is a dynamic movement, okay? It's something where you're going to be moving through space, okay? Now, obviously, all of the other movements, you do that as well, right? You do move something through space. It's just not as much space, and your feet are planted on the ground for most of these other things. Okay, when it comes to lunging, if you go right into lunging dynamically, what's going to happen is you're going to lunge and you have to move through a larger amount of space, which makes things more difficult. You're interacting with gravity in different ways. You're constantly changing the levers on your body, especially where they're going to be acting through. It makes the movement more complicated than it needs to be at first. So what you do to start the first progression is a body weight split squat. And all that means is you get into a lunge stance and you lunge from here. You don't step forward, you don't step back. Now, if we're going to talk about common mistakes with the lunge, okay, the hardest part for people of starting to do a split stance or even a lunge in general is figuring out where to put their foot, okay? People will not have an awareness at first about how different it is to place the foot down and what that will do to impact what we're looking for. Okay, so just like other movements, one thing we are looking for is for our torso to be upright. Okay, we don't want to see a lot of forward lean when we're doing a lunge. We want to keep it upright to make sure that we're emphasizing the right working muscles. I'll get to that in a second. But we're looking for upright torso. At the beginning stages of learning and strength training, we're looking for a flat front foot with active feet, okay? The back foot, the heel is up, okay? So some people will try to lunge like this. They will try to keep their back heel down. They don't have the understanding that foot, you have to be on the ball of your foot, and it has to act like a pendulum, a pivot, so that you're able to go down and up fluidly. So your feet have to be placed at the proper stance apart. They should not be too wide, but they also can't be in the same line. If it's the same line, you're not going to be able to basically move fluidly up and down because your hips and shoulders are a certain length apart, and you need to mimic that with where your feet go. Okay, so I need to step my foot back in a line where I'm still shoulder width, I'm not too wide. Now, placing the foot is something that, as far as the distance back, that is going to differ from person to person. Okay, so from person to person, depending on how long their legs are, depending on how mobile they are, depending on how big their trunk is, this will differ, and it might take somebody some time to figure it out. But what you want to yield from somebody's foot placement is when you're in the bottom is essentially 2 90-degree angles in the legs. That's where you should end up. Okay, as you're going through this, you still want to emphasize the spread the floor kind of technique. So when I go down, I still want to, in a way, make sure that I am activating my glutes in the back. So if I let my knee collapse in and I come like this, you are not going to be emphasizing your glute, and you're going to put a lot of strain on your hip and your knee joint. So you still need to make sure that you have a little bit of abduction and external rotation as you go down to emphasize that your glute and your hamstring will be doing the work. In the bottom, as you come up through the top, you'll start to work through the quadriceps muscles, right? So one of the reasons you do lunges is to work the quadriceps muscles, but you're also going to get some glute and especially a little bit of hamstring in the bottom. A big one is your adductor muscles, right? So whenever you're doing a single leg action, you're going to get more activation from your adductor muscles. So you have to have that awareness as well. So the first place you start is you start at hands in a goblet position is where I like to start, because this is where we're going to go next. I start here. I'm looking for two 90-degree angles of the legs in the bottom. My legs aren't too far apart. I still spread the floor in a way, still spread the floor on the way down. I'm keeping my chest upright. I slightly tap the knee and I come right up. Okay, that's the first progression of the lunge. Okay, so the first part of mastering a lunge is the essential aspect of getting the bodyweight split squat down. What you're really doing there is reinforcing to somebody that the way that they want to feel their front leg on the way down. Okay, now, and also too, especially when you're talking about lunging, if you're going to go forward lunging or reverse lunging, which we'll get to, it's about where to place the back foot. Those things are going to be pretty much the same throughout each of the next movements. So before we move on to the next three movements, we're going to go over what the actual loading progression is for each one, which is the same. Okay, so for each of the movements that we're going to talk about, and the way the order is going to go is we're going to do loaded split squat, we're going to do loaded reverse lunge, and then we're going to do loaded rear foot elevated or Bulgarian split squat. Okay, all of those have the same loading progression. Okay, and the way that that goes is it all starts before you do anything else is you always want to load goblet first, because goblet, one, the weights aren't going to be that heavy inherently because you can't hold as much weight as you can put on your back. And two, it enforces you to stay upright. So it's a pretty much guaranteed, not a guarantee, but it's a pretty sure way to protect somebody by making sure they keep an upright trunk position whenever they're doing one of these movements. So you always want to start with a goblet variation. The next thing that you do is to add more load is you add another dumbbell, so you hold dumbbells at your sides. Okay? So you can hold more weight in your hands like this than you can hold in a goblet position. So this is a way for you to add more load, and what it does is it keeps the weight closer to your center of mass. So there will be less likely of a chance that you're going to rotate and fall forward because the weight is at your hips compared to up here. Okay, so there'll be a lot more movement up here than there will be at your sides. The last thing that you go to, and remember, we're talking about the loading scheme for the next movements. The next thing that you go to is a barbell. So once you have had a goblet and then you've been able to master getting the dumbbells at your sides, that is when you can put the bar on your back and you can do this loading scheme for all of the three movements. So you could do it in a split squat, you could do it in a reverse lunge, or you can do it in a rear foot elevate. Okay, so once you put a bar on your back, that is when the movements get the most complicated, the most complex, because the weights will be higher and it's at a point that is further away from your center of mass, and there's more risk of you falling forward and causing rotation. Okay, so it's important to understand that you start with goblet, you work your way to dumbbells at sides, and then you put a bar on the back for either of the next three movements, which I'm going to go over next. So we've already gone over how to do the split squat. And we also just went over the actual loading scheme progression that you use when you're talking about each of these movements. So for the split squat, we've already gone over it. Now it's just a matter of being able to control the load from where you decide to put it, right? So if I'm here in a split squat and I start with goblet, okay, you just have to understand where the load is relative to your center of mass and make sure you account for that. But the movement strategy is the same. We're looking for 90-degree angles. We're looking for making sure we turn on our glutes and we have our quads working up through the top. Okay, so we're coming down, coming right up. down, right up, ensuring we have those nice 90-degree angles with wherever the load is, whether it's at the sides, whether it's on your back, or in a goblet. Okay, so now that we've gone over the split squat with weight, now we need to go over the reverse lunge. So the key with the reverse lunge, or even lunging forward if you want to add this in too, it's about the placement of the foot that's stepping, okay? So essentially we go through split squat first so that a person knows where to find themselves. Because once they get to here, they know how to do the movement, right? Instead of going and trying to move through the motion without knowing where to put their foot. So once you've mastered the split squat, when you add in and you go to reverse lunge, what happens now is you say, all right, you just need to step back to where your foot would be in a split squat. And then from there, you drop right down and come right back up. Now, with the reverse lunge and even lunging, the mistake that you need to write down that people do is they change this into a two-part movement when it's really a one-part movement. Okay, so what people will do is they will step, they'll pause, they will do a split squat to here, and then they will step forward. A true reverse lunge means that you step back right down and then come right back up. It's a fluid motion. So if you see, once you introduce this to somebody, that is something that you will probably see. Another thing you will see with this is that they will step in the wrong place. They will not know where to put their foot. They will either step too far back or they will step too wide. So you might see somebody do this, or you might see somebody do this. Okay, so the problems really stem from foot placement. Okay, and also turning it into a split squat. So when you move from split squat to reverse lunge, you want to make sure that the movement is fluid, it's not two parts, and the foot placement is correct to ensure that you're back to that original movement pattern that we've been talking about. All right, so the last movement progression within the lunge is the rear foot elevated lunge, or the Bulgarian split squat. Okay, so this does have a split squat in it, but the problem is, or the difference is now that the back leg is up on something. So this movement gets more complicated because now you don't have 2 feet on the ground. So balance becomes an issue. Now, the thing that you want to avoid, and the reason that this is the last progression of this, is because if balance is a problem and you have weight somewhere on you, you're just more of a risk for injury, especially if you're going to fall over or if you're going to start doing it wrong to compensate for the fact that you can't control the weight. Okay, so the biggest problems with this is people don't know where to put the front foot. Okay, so everybody knows, oh, I got to put my foot back. Okay, they know how to put their foot back, but what happens is they go down and they don't know how to get to that nice 90-degree angle on both sides. So the key is that you have to be able to place the front foot in a spot where you can drop down and get that nice 90-degree angle, okay? This one is something that you just have to give practice with. There is a little bit more of a mobility aspect to this because of having the back leg elevated. So what you might get from people's complaints about their back leg and the quad or the hip flexor kind of feels like it's overstretching. So that's something that you need to be aware of. You don't load that movement until you address that issue. Okay, the big thing and the form cue that you want to give with this is stay as upright as you can, and having an active front foot placed in the right spot is essential so that you don't feel off balance and that you can stabilize yourself so you can go right down, right back up, and hit the position markers that you're looking for. Okay, so I kind of changed this one up. So your sheet should say body weight split squat. It should say loaded split squat, reverse lunge, and then rear foot elevated or Bulgarian split squat. And you just have to have the understanding that either of those last three, the way and the progression in which you load it, is from goblet to dumbbells at side and then to barbell. Okay, they're all progressed the same way, and it's something important to know which option is best for the person at hand, which option is best for what you're trying to accomplish, while making sure that someone's staying safe. Okay, again, the working muscles for this, we have glutes, we do have hamstrings slightly in the bottom, we have quadriceps big time at the upper half, and you also have your adductor working the whole time just as a part of that movement. Other than that, you have finished movement number 5. Go ahead and move on to movement number 6.